On August 14, 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 take off at 9:07 am from Larnaca Airport in Cyprus to Athens, Greece. This commercial passenger flight carried 150 passengers and 6 crew members, with a total of 121 people on board. The flight was piloted by an experienced 58 years old German captain Hans-Jürgen Martin, who had 60,900 hours of flying experience. The co-pilot was 51 years old Pampos Charalambos with 7,449 hours of flying experience. 15 minutes after takeoff at exactly 9:12, the plane was cruising at an altitude of 12,040 feet. Initially, everything was normal and the pilots were doing their duties. However, shortly afterward, an alarm suddenly went on, leaving the pilot confused as to why it sounded, especially since everything had been normal up to that point. They soon realized it was the takeoff configuration alarm, which typically goes on during takeoff. But the reason for the alarm sounding at 12,000 feet was something they could not understand. To find a solution to the problem, the pilots connected air traffic control ATC to report the issue. At that very moment, several additional alarms began to sound simultaneously in the cockpit. In the loud noises of those alarms, ATC officers had difficulty hearing the pilots clearly. However, what truly scared the pilot was the sound of the master caution alarm, which only activates when multiple systems on the plane started overheating at the same time. The pilots were unable to understand the root cause of those issues. Hearing all those alarms, the passenger became panicked and the crew members tried to calm them down. Meanwhile, when the plane reaches an altitude of 8,000 feet, the oxygen level inside the plane started to drop, making it difficult for passengers to breathe. Due to the lack of oxygen, the oxygen masks deployed automatically. The pilot repeatedly attempted to communicate with the air traffic control, but their words were not reaching ATC. Shortly afterward, all communication between the plane and ATC was completely lost. Despite repeated attempts, ATC was unable to re-establish communication with the plane. The route from Cyprus to Athens, Greece usually takes about 1 hour and 45 minutes. This means if there is no issues, the plane was expected to land in Athens at 10:52 am. By 9:30 am, the plane was flying at an altitude of 34,000 feet. Then at 9:37, it entered the Athens flight information region. The Athens control room repeatedly tried to contact the plane from 10:12 to 10:50 am, but they could not establish any communication. It was 10:12 am when the plane was scheduled to land at the airport, but surprisingly, the plane was nowhere to be found, even in the vicinity of the Athens airport. Due to the loss of communication with the plane and its failure to land in Athens as scheduled, the ATC sent two Greek F-16 fighter jets at 11:05 to locate it. After searching for a while, they finally spotted the plane at 11:24 am. To determine if something terrible had happened inside the aircraft, one of the fighter jets flew in very close. The pilot of the fighter jet had finds that the plane captain had sitting with his head down, indicating that he had likely lost consciousness for some reason. To assess the passenger's situation, the fighter jet moved to the back of the plane. Surprisingly, despite two fighter jets following the plane, none of the passengers were looking at the fighter jets, nor there was any kind of movement among them. The fighter jets continued flying the plane, and at 11:49 am, they observed an unknown individual moving from cabin towards the cockpit, eventually sitting in the pilot's seat. The fighter jet pilots noticed this and tried to signal the unknown person. The man was trying to explain something to the pilot of the fighter jet but could not make it through. 1 minute later, at 11:50, the left engine of the plane stopped working, causing the aircraft till left and began descending. Exactly 10 minutes later at 12 pm, the right engine also shut down. As a result, the unknown person trying to control the plane completely lost control. After remaining in the air for only 4 more minutes, at 12:04 it crashed into a mountain area about 4 km from the airport in Athens. In this tragic accident, all 121 people on board lost their lives. Just imagine for a moment those two fighter jets pilots witnessing 121 people perishing in a moment. Then how did they feel? They could only watch helplessly, unable to assist despite their will to help. After all, the crash of Helios Flight 522 made headlines worldwide, and the people across the globe learned the heartbreaking incident. A quick rescue operation was concluded, and all the bodies were recovered from the wreckage. However, upon investigation, researchers discovered that everyone on board had likely died well before the plane crashed. But if everyone had died over an hour before the crash, then who was controlling the aircraft for nearly 2 hours? And why did everyone die together on board? The unknown person who had moved from the cabin to the cockpit was flight attendant Andreas Protomo. Up until the final moments before the crash, Andreas had been trying to reach ATC's control room and send out a distress signal by saying Mayday Mayday 5 times. Unfortunately, due to the plane's damaged communication system, his emergency call never reached ATC.
Mayday.
For context, Mayday signal is typically repeated 3 times by the captain when the lives of the passenger on plane or ship are in grave danger. Despite his best efforts, Andreas could not reach his message to the Athens traffic control room. Moreover, Andreas did not have the experience to control a plane in the emergency situation. Nevertheless, he managed to steer the plane towards the unpopulated area. The experts investigated and found out that, according to the flight schedule, the plane was supposed to fly for 1 hour and 45 minutes. However, because it remaining airborne at 34,000 feet for 3 hours, the left engine ran out of fuel at 11:50 and the right engine followed at 12, causing both engines to shut down. Yet they also confirmed that the shutdown of the engines was not what led to the deaths of the passenger and crew. Later, investigators discovered the true cause of the incident. After the crash, as the investigator examined the cockpit controls, they noticed a button on the control panel, which was the plane's pressurization mode selector. Upon inspecting the setting of the button, the officers understood everything related to the tragic incident. The pressurization mode selector controls the airflow within the plane. The engines process outside air and gradually introduce it into the cabin, preventing any oxygen difficulty inside the plane. The button maintains the internal pressure of the plane and supply oxygen to the passengers when needed. The pressurization mode selector is usually set to auto mode, but if it is set to manual mode, the captain and co-pilot must closely monitor it. If the button is on manual mode and the pilots are required to keep an eye on it, there is no way it could have caused such a major accident. However, unfortunately, it was indeed the main cause of the tragic incident. The day before the flight, the plane was taken for servicing, where technicians performed detailed maintenance to prepare it. During this service, the technicians accidentally left the pressurization button on manual mode and handed over the plane to the pilot. Since the pressurization button was in manual mode during the flight, the oxygen level inside the plane gradually began to decrease, causing headaches among the passengers. Due to the lack of oxygen, an alarm sounded in the cabin. The pilots heard the alarm, but unfortunately they could not identify the root of the problem, so they did not check the pressurization mode selector button. And because of this little mistake, there is a critical lack of oxygen in the plane. As the oxygen levels drop, the cabin's oxygen masks automatically deploy to ensure the passenger receive oxygen temporarily. The same should have happened for the pilots, allowing their masks to deploy as well. However, in the case of Flight 522, either the pilots could not use their mask in time or their oxygen masks may not have worked correctly. Typically, those masks can provide oxygen for around 12 to 15 minutes. If the pilots had 12 to 15 minutes, they surely could lower the plane from 30,000 feet to a place where people could normally breathe inside the plane. However, it doesn't happen, resulting in the pilot and co-pilot died for hypoxia, i.e. lack of oxygen, and later on passenger beginning to lose consciousness one by one as the oxygen supply in their masks ran out. But surprisingly, the flight attendant Andreas did not lose consciousness in this situation. You may wonder why he did not experience oxygen difficulty. Andreas was a scuba diver, and scuba divers are trained to hold their breath for long periods and survive in low oxygen environments. For this reason, Andreas was able to keep breathing, while unfortunately the others had already passed away. Andreas made every effort to save everyone on the plane, but in the end he was unsuccessful and the plane eventually crashed. 15 months after this tragic accident, the Athens Airport Authority released an investigation report. They disclosed that the pressurization mode selector should have been set to auto mode, but the service crew had left it in manual mode before handing the plane over the pilots, leading to this horrific accident. If the service crew had not left the pressurization mode selector in manual mode, or if the pilots had paid closer attention to the controls panel, then such a tragic accident could have been avoided. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and share it. We look forward to seeing your beautiful face again. Thank you.